The Caribbean dawn was just beginning to soften the sky when Amy Lynn Bradley disappeared. At 5:30 a.m. on March 24, 1998, the Rhapsody of the Seas floated quietly off the coast of Curaçao. The sea was calm, the horizon unbroken, that endless turquoise expanse that hides everything and reveals nothing. Inside cabin 9252, the Bradley family slept, exhausted from another night of cruise festivities. Only Amy's father, Ron, stirred. He stepped onto the balcony, still half awake, and there she was, his 23-year-old daughter, lying on a lounge chair, drifting in and out of sleep in the humid pre-dawn air. He looked at her for a moment. She was safe. He went back inside. 30 minutes later, Amy was gone. Her cigarettes and lighter were missing. Nothing else. Not her shoes, not her ID. Not the sense that something was suddenly terribly wrong. When Ron returned to balcony, the chair was empty. The ship hummed below, engine steady. A new day had begun. Somewhere between that fleeting moment of reassurance and the cold shock of her absence, Amy Lynn Bradley had vanished into the thin line between water and sky. The panic started quietly. Ron checked the corridors. Iva, her mother, combed through the decks. Her brother Brad ran to the ship's purser. But the announcement never came. Not yet. The crew insisted Amy must have gone to breakfast or for a morning walk. The family begged for a ship-wide alert before the passengers disembarked at port. The request was denied. It would be nearly 3 hours before anyone outside the family heard her name over the intercom. By then, hundreds of passengers had already stepped ashore onto Curaçao. To understand the weight of what happened that morning, you have to picture the ship itself, a floating city 11 stories high, 2,400 souls on board. Surveillance was limited, privacy abundant, and jurisdiction blurred. It was the perfect place for someone to disappear, and the worst place to look for them. Amy wasn't a reckless traveler. She was confident, athletic, a strong swimmer, a lifeguard who understood the ocean's pull. She had just finished college, preparing to start her career. This cruise was meant to celebrate that, a family trip before she began her adult life. Yet the last confirmed sighting places her in the one place no one could reach once she was gone, the ship's private balcony. No one saw her fall. No splash was reported. No alarm sounded. When the Royal Caribbean crew finally initiated a search, the Rhapsody of the Seas had already docked. Investigators combed through cabins and common areas, but by then, passengers were scattered across the island. The Bradley family, desperate, stayed aboard, searching lounges, storage rooms, stairwells, calling her name. The search extended into the water that afternoon. The Dutch Caribbean Coast Guard launched boats and helicopters, sweeping the blue horizon for any trace of her. Nothing. Not a shirt, not a shoe, not even a sign of struggle. The sea was blank, like it had swallowed her whole. The Coast Guard's official statement came quietly. No evidence of a person overboard. In the days that followed, the Bradley family replayed every moment. The late-night deck party, the ship's band, the laughter, Amy dancing in the glow of the neon lights. One of the musicians, Alistair Yellow Douglas, was among the last to see her alive. He told investigators she had been friendly, easygoing, and that nothing seemed off. He passed a polygraph test, or so it was said. No charges were ever filed. But something about that night stuck in everyone's mind. Was Amy being watched? Did she step out onto that balcony and encounter someone she knew? Or did the ocean claim her in the silent hour before dawn? Her family didn't believe that last part. They knew Amy. She wouldn't have leaned too far, wouldn't have jumped. She wasn't depressed. She was full of plans. Something else had happened. Something beyond that balcony. As the ship sailed away from Curaçao days later, her parents stood at the rail, watching the coastline disappear. They felt helpless in a way only those trapped between hope and horror can understand. The authorities told them to go home, to wait for news. But the ocean doesn't give back what it takes easily. Back in Virginia, the search expanded. FBI involvement, Caribbean police, Interpol. Posters went up with Amy's face. Letters, sightings, false tips. Every call a mix of hope and heartbreak. And beneath it all, one haunting question kept echoing. How does someone vanish from a locked, floating world surrounded by thousands of witnesses. The disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley would come to symbolize something bigger, a collision of paradise and peril. A young woman celebrated in brochures, smiling beneath Caribbean sunlight, turned into a name on an FBI missing person list. Her case exposed the shadowy gaps of international travel, those legal gray zones where tragedy meets indifference, where families wait years for answers that never come. And even now, decades later, the mystery remains sealed beneath the same waters that once shimmered outside her balcony door. When Amy Lynn Bradley disappeared, time became the enemy. Every passing minute widened the distance between truth and speculation, and on the open sea, minutes meant miles. The morning she went missing, the Rhapsody of the Seas was scheduled to dock in Willemstad, Curaçao. The ship's captain and crew insisted there was no reason to believe anything criminal had occurred. Amy was an adult, they said. She could have gone ashore early. Maybe she just needed space. But her parents, Ron and Iva, knew better. Amy didn't just go for walks. She didn't vanish without her shoes, without her ID, without telling anyone where she was going. Still, their pleas were brushed aside. At 6 a.m., Amy was gone. By 7:50, the first announcement went out over the intercom. Miss Amy Bradley, please contact the purser's desk. It sounded like a routine call, not a plea, not a warning. To the hundreds of passengers already streaming off the gangway, it was just another name. Ron and Iva begged the crew to make a more urgent announcement, to seal the exits, to delay disembarkation until the ship could be searched. The request was denied. By the time the Bradley family got permission to search the ship themselves, nearly 3,000 people had walked ashore. The Rhapsody of the Seas was a labyrinth of corridors and locked compartments. Room attendants went door to door. Security checked the lower decks. Divers were dispatched beneath the hull. Nothing. The crew told the family not to worry. She's probably just around the ship somewhere. But hours turned into a day, and the ship's casual confidence began to feel more like neglect. By that evening, the family realized what no one else seemed willing to admit. If Amy wasn't on the ship, and she wasn't in the water, then someone might have taken her. It took more than 12 hours before the Royal Caribbean Line contacted the Royal Netherlands Antilles Coast Guard. Helicopters began to scan the sea. They combed the waters off Curaçao and Aruba for 4 days. Radar, sonar, rescue vessels. Still nothing. No clothing. No floating debris. No sign of struggle or splash ever recorded in the logs. Investigators tried to reconstruct her final hours. Around 3:30 a.m., Amy and her brother Brad had returned to their family cabin after dancing at the ship's disco. Witnesses confirmed seeing her with members of the ship's band, Blue Orchid. One of them, Alistair Yellow Douglas, told police he last saw Amy heading toward an elevator with another crew member. No CCTV captured her. No crew admitted to seeing her after that. When the Coast Guard's report came in, the language was sterile. No indication of overboard incident. To the Bradleys, that phrasing was unbearable. They believed Amy had been abducted, possibly trafficked. It wasn't a baseless fear. Cruise ships operate under flag states, meaning the law that governs them depends on the country whose flag they fly. Rhapsody of the Seas was registered in Norway at the time, not the U.S. That meant U.S. law enforcement, including the FBI, could only intervene after the ship docked. By then, evidence was already contaminated, and witnesses were scattering across countries. In Curaçao, local authorities questioned the ship's staff. But without jurisdiction, they had no power to hold anyone. Crew members went on to their next contracts. Passengers flew home. The ship departed. For Amy's parents, the most painful moment was stepping off the ship without her. They had come aboard as a family of 4. They left as 3. Back home in Virginia, the investigation moved under the FBI's wing. Agents began gathering passenger lists, staff rosters, ship logs. The Bradley family provided photos, medical records, and information about Amy's distinctive tattoos. A Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball on her shoulder, a sun on her lower back, a Chinese symbol on her right ankle. Those tattoos would later become crucial, because if Amy was alive, someone, somewhere, would recognize them. Days turned into weeks. Then came the first lead, A taxi driver in Curacao reported seeing a young woman matching Amy's description the same morning she vanished. She'd been running down a street near the harbor, panicked, asking where she could find a phone. Investigators pursued it, but no one else could corroborate his account. Next came the divers. In August 1998, 5 months after Amy's disappearance, a pair of Canadian divers claimed they'd seen a woman resembling Amy on a Curacao beach. She was with 2 men, one tall, one bald, and she seemed distressed. The divers said she tried to speak, but was pulled away. When they surfaced, she was gone. Again, no evidence, no names, just an echo of something possibly real. The Bradley family clung to every report. They distributed flyers, hired private investigators, even met with the crew's company's lawyers. The reward fund grew to $250,000. But as time passed, the media moved on. Cruise companies remained silent, and in the absence of proof, the world's attention drifted, just as the ship had that morning. Royal Caribbean issued brief statements of sympathy, emphasizing their cooperation, but to the Bradleys, it fell hollow. They believed the company's reluctance to act early had cost them their daughter's life or her freedom. In interviews, Ron's voice would shake when he described the hours before the announcement. "They wouldn't let us speak on the intercom," he said. "They told us not to panic the passengers. But my daughter was missing. What was I supposed to do? Sit quietly while they had brunch?" For every missing person, there's a moment when hope begins to fracture. For Amy's family, it came around the 6th day, when the Coast Guard suspended their search. From that moment forward, the Bradleys were on their own. They started contacting human rights organizations, trafficking experts, journalists, anyone who would listen. The story spread across the United States. A vibrant 23-year-old woman had vanished from a ship full of witnesses, under the watch of a billion-dollar company, in a place where no one was responsible. It didn't make sense. And that's what made it terrifying. When the FBI formally opened its case, it listed Amy under kidnapping, suspected foul play. Her photo was entered into Interpol databases. Age progression sketches were made. And though years would pass without any verified trace, small clues kept appearing like breadcrumbs scattered across the Caribbean. Each one gave the family a reason to keep searching. Each one carried a new kind of heartbreak. By 1999, the hope that Amy had somehow survived was no longer far-fetched. It was something darker, possible, but unprovable. A witness claimed to have seen her in a brothel in Curacao, whispering to a U.S. Navy officer, "My name is Amy Bradley. Please help me. I'm trapped." The man didn't report it immediately. By the time he did, the building had burned down. Every new report deepened the mystery. Not closure, not clarity, just more questions. And as the years dragged on, one theory began to take hold among investigators and the family alike. Amy Lynn Bradley had not fallen overboard. She had been taken. Hope is both a light and a trap. For the Bradley family, it became both flickering, unsteady, and impossible to extinguish. By 1999, a year had passed since Amy vanished. Her name had appeared on FBI lists, in Caribbean police files, in the margins of cruise ship reports. Still, there was no trace of her, until a phone call changed everything. A former U.S. Navy petty officer named William Hefner contacted the FBI with an alarming account. He claimed that months earlier, while on shore leave in Curacao, he had visited a local brothel. Inside, a young white woman approached him and whispered, "My name is Amy Bradley. Please help me. I'm trapped." He didn't report it right away, fearing perhaps that no one would believe him. When he finally came forward, the brothel had burned to the ground. No survivors. No records. The lead, like every other, evaporated into the Caribbean heat. But something about Hefner's story resonated with Amy's parents. He described her in detail, her tattoos, her hair color, even the nervous way she spoke. He said she looked healthy, but terrified, that she was surrounded by men who watched every move she made. It was the first time anyone had suggested what the Bradleys feared most, that Amy hadn't fallen or fled, but been taken. And the setting made sense. Curacao, like many port cities, was known for a thriving underground sex trade. one that preyed on tourists and the vulnerable. The Bradleys began to believe that Amy's disappearance wasn't an accident at all. It was a crime, one planned, executed, and buried beneath international bureaucracy. The family's private investigators began tracing patterns. Cruise ships brought transient populations, unmonitored access to ports, and little legal oversight. A woman could be let off a ship under pretense, escorted into a vehicle, and gone within minutes. Amy was independent, outgoing, and trusting, qualities that could make her a target. Witnesses recalled seeing her in conversation with several crew members, including the ship's guitarist, Yellow Douglas. He was questioned, polygraphed, and released. No evidence tied him directly to her disappearance. But rumors spread. Some claimed to have heard shouts that night. "Senorita kidnapped," near the pool deck, a story later resurfacing in 2025 when a Netflix documentary revisited old interviews. None of it was ever verified, but each new claim deepened the sense of something sinister at play. Then, in August 1998, 5 months after the disappearance, another lead emerged. 2 Canadian scuba divers claimed they'd seen a woman resembling Amy on a beach in Curacao. She was walking between 2 men, one muscular, one bald, who seemed aggressive. The woman, they said, tried to speak but was quickly silenced. When the divers later saw Amy's missing poster, they were convinced it had been her. The FBI investigated but could find no proof. No witnesses, no photos, no record of the men. Still, Ron and Iva couldn't let it go. They traveled back to Curacao themselves, retracing her last known steps, meeting with police, taxi drivers, locals, anyone who might remember seeing her that morning. Every conversation ended the same way. Sympathy, curiosity, no answers. By the end of 1999, the story took another cruel turn. This one born not of evil but greed. A man named Frank Jones, a self-proclaimed former U.S. Navy SEAL, contacted the Bradleys claiming he had proof that Amy was alive. He said she was being held captive in Curacao by traffickers. He described her tattoos. He said he knew where she was. He promised he could rescue her. Ron and Iva clung to every word. They raised funds, mortgaged property, and wired Jones over $200,000 for what he called a rescue operation. Weeks passed. Updates came through cryptic messages. "We're closing in. We've seen her. The extraction will happen soon." Then silence. When the FBI traced Jones's communications, the truth surfaced. There was no team, no operation, no evidence Amy had been found. Jones had fabricated the entire thing, preying on a grieving family's hope for profit. He was arrested in 2002 and sentenced to prison for mail fraud. In court, Iva Bradley's voice broke as she told the judge, "He took more than our money. He took the one thing we had left, hope." Despite the betrayal, the Bradleys refused to stop searching. And in 2005, a new spark reignited the case. A witness in Barbados claimed she saw Amy in a department store restroom. She described a woman in her 30s accompanied by 3 men who looked like bodyguards. The woman, she said, leaned close and whispered, "Can we stop and see the children?" The phrase made no sense, unless she was speaking in code or pleading indirectly for help. When the witness later saw Amy's photograph on a missing persons show, she contacted authorities immediately. A forensic artist produced a sketch. It bore a haunting resemblance to Amy's features, older, thinner, but unmistakable. That same year, another shocking image surfaced online. A photograph from a Caribbean escort website showed a woman who looked nearly identical to Amy. Same tattoos, same facial structure. The photo was dated 2003. The woman's name on the site was Jazz. The Bradleys turned it over to the FBI. Forensic analysts compared bone structure, facial ratios, and the distinctive Tasmanian devil tattoo on the shoulder. The resemblance was striking, but the image had no traceable metadata, no location tags. The website was hosted in an offshore country. Within weeks, it disappeared. It was another dead end, or worse, a glimpse into something too horrifying to prove. Each of these leads, the divers, the Navy witness, the Barbados sighting, the escort photo, became part of a growing narrative. Not proof, but possibility. A story that refused to die because it might still be true. To the Bradley family, this wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern, a trail leading to one conclusion. Amy was alive, somewhere in the underworld of human trafficking, waiting to be found. But to investigators, the case was slipping beyond reach. Without physical evidence, no body, no possessions, no DNA, the FBI couldn't confirm abduction. To the media, the story had grown cold. To the family, time had become a thief. Year after year, Amy's face appeared on America's Most Wanted 48 Hours Unsolved Mysteries. Each airing brought in new tips. Each tip led nowhere. And yet, one truth endured. Her story refused to fade. Because Amy Lynn Bradley wasn't just another missing tourist. She was a woman who vanished from a cruise ship without a trace. Her disappearance exposed something that terrified travelers everywhere. That in a world built on luxury and leisure, there could still exist a darkness so deep it could swallow someone whole. By the mid-2000s, Amy Lynn Bradley's name had become a symbol of what the ocean could hide. The posters faded. The leads grew colder. But for Ron and Ivor Bradley, time only sharpened the ache. They were no longer searching for answers. They were fighting against forgetting. The Caribbean cruise line continued sailing, new passengers booking the same cabins, walking the same decks where Amy had last been seen. The Rhapsody of the Seas moved on. The Bradley family could not. They spent years reconstructing those final hours, desperate to find a thread that might still lead to her. Each new investigator promised breakthroughs. Each tip ended in silence. But Amy's case refused to disappear completely. Every few years, another sighting, another photograph, another rumor pulled the family back into that orbit of uncertainty. The world saw the case as a mystery. For the Bradleys, it was a wound that never closed. Ron replayed the moment he saw Amy asleep on the balcony, that fleeting image that became both proof and punishment. "If I just stayed awake," he told People magazine years later. "If I just talked to her." He carried that memory like a curse. The balcony, the sea breeze, the empty chair, frozen in time. Iva coped by working the phones. Every day she called investigators, journalists, embassies. She memorized the phone numbers of every consulate in the Caribbean. Brad, Amy's younger brother, who had been with her at the disco that night, battled guilt his own, the weight of walking off that ship alive while his sister vanished into rumor. Cruise ship disappearances weren't rare. Between 1995 and 2010, dozens of passengers were reported missing from international waters, many never found. But Amy's case struck a particular chord because she wasn't drunk, reckless, or alone. She was sober, vigilant, a strong swimmer, and she vanished in the one place a person shouldn't be able to vanish, a contained, monitored vessel. It exposed something that cruise companies rarely address publicly, the jurisdictional void that surrounds crimes at sea. When a ship sails under one country's flag, carries passengers from another, and docks in yet another nation's port, who takes responsibility when something goes wrong? In Amy's case, the answer was no one. The U.S. FBI had limited power to act beyond territorial waters. The Dutch Caribbean police had no authority to detain foreign crew, and Royal Caribbean had every incentive to protect its reputation. In that legal no-man's land, Amy vanished twice, once on the balcony, and again from the system meant to protect her. For years, the Bradleys wrote to Congress, pushing for stronger oversight of cruise lines. Their advocacy joined a growing movement, led by families of other missing passengers. Eventually, those efforts helped influence the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act of 2010, which mandated better reporting procedures, onboard surveillance, and U.S. jurisdiction over certain crimes at sea. But for the Bradleys, the law came too late. That same year, March 24th, 2010, 12 years after she vanished, Amy Lynn Bradley was declared legally dead. The declaration wasn't closure. It was formality, a box to check so the family could manage bank accounts, insurance, legal affairs, things that felt mechanical against the enormity of what they'd lost. Still, Ron refused to call her gone. "I don't believe she's dead," he told reporters. "I believe she's somewhere she doesn't want to be." The 2010s brought new technology, but not new answers. Age-progressed images circulated online, showing what Amy might look like in her 30s, then 40s. Podcasts revisited the story. Crime forums dissected every rumor. On Reddit, threads debated the photo of Jazz from the escort site, analyzing the shape of her tattoo pixel by pixel. To strangers, Amy was a case file. To her family, she was still a daughter with a bedroom waiting for her. In 2023, renewed attention came with the rise of true crime streaming. Production companies began re-examining old disappearances, combining interviews, ship records, and psychological profiles to craft long-form documentaries. Amy's case was among the first chosen, not because of new evidence, but because of what it represented, how easily a life can vanish in plain sight, and how long a family can survive on hope alone. When Netflix announced Amy Bradley is missing in 2025, interest exploded again. Old witnesses resurfaced. Former crew members gave interviews. And for the first time in years, the public began asking the same questions the Bradleys never stopped asking. What happened between 5:15 and 6 a.m. that morning aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas? And who saw what? The documentary featured newly uncovered testimonies, including one from a ship's bartender who recalled hearing a shout near the pool deck, "Senorita, kidnapped." The claim couldn't be verified, but it reignited debates over whether the ship's security ignored early signs of trouble. It also revisited the photographs of Jazz, this time with enhanced imaging. Forensic analysts confirmed the tattoo's placement was consistent but not definitive, which meant the nightmare remained exactly where it always had, halfway between possibility and proof. Even the producers admitted. The more they investigated, the more elusive the truth became. Every theory still fit, and yet none did. If Amy was taken, why leave no trace? If she fell, why was there no evidence? If she ran, why no withdrawals, no sightings in the digital age? For the Bradleys, the Netflix series was both a gift and a wound reopened. Millions of new viewers learned Amy's name. Tips pouring again, most false, some chillingly specific. And through it all, Iva's voice trembled in interviews, the same line repeated after 27 years. She didn't fall off that ship. Someone took her. Amy's case lives in that rare space between disappearance and myth, a story that feels too impossible to be real, and yet too detailed to be fiction. There's no ending, no culprit, no evidence. Only a series of closed doors and unanswered phone calls, spanning from a cruise cabin balcony in 1998 to the glowing screens of viewers in 2025. It's a reminder that beneath the glittering surface of luxury and leisure, there exists a silence deep enough to swallow truth itself. Every mystery that endures long enough becomes more than a story. It becomes an argument. Over the decades, Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance has fractured into competing camps of belief, each one clinging to fragments of evidence like pieces of a broken compass pointing in different directions. The truth, still missing, sits somewhere between them. Theory 1. The fall. The simplest explanation is often the first offered, that Amy fell. Royal Caribbean proposed it early, almost reflexively, in the same way cruise lines often do when tragedy surfaces on the open sea. The idea was straightforward. Amy stepped out to smoke on the balcony, leaned on the railing, slipped, and fell into the dark water below. No witnesses, no splash heard, no body recovered. But the facts complicate that simplicity. Amy wasn't an inexperienced swimmer. She'd been a lifeguard for years, trained in rescue and ocean safety. The Rhapsody of the Seas was docked near shore at dawn, the water below calm and warm. A person falling overboard that would have likely survived long enough to be seen, especially if she could swim as Amy could. Moreover, the Coast Guard's radar sweeps and helicopter searches, conducted within hours, turned up nothing. No debris, no heat signature, no movement. The report's conclusion was cautious but clear. No indication of a person overboard. There was also no record of an overboard alarm, nor any signs of disturbance on the balcony. No marks, no fingerprints on the railing consistent with a fall. And so, even the simplest theory began to feel too neat, too hollow. Theory 2, voluntary disappearance. Another camp, quieter but persistent, suggests that Amy may have chosen to vanish. She was 23, freshly graduated, standing at the threshold of adulthood, possibly restless. Some believe she could have walked off the ship at Curacao before the family noticed, starting over under a new identity. But this theory collapses under scrutiny. Her passport, ID, credit cards, and shoes were left behind. No withdrawal, no communication, no trace of her name ever surfaced in travel or immigration databases. Amy was close to her family. She wasn't running from them. Even the notion of impulsive escape conflicts with what's known. Amy had a new job waiting for her back home, a pet she adored, and an upcoming move to her own apartment. There were no signs of turmoil. Voluntary disappearance explains the how, but not the why. And like every other theory, it requires the impossible. Silence from a woman who, by all accounts, loved to be heard. Theory 3. Abduction and human trafficking. The third theory is the darkest, and the one Amy's family has never stopped believing. It begins with what's known. Amy was last seen socializing with members of the ship's band. Witnesses describe flirtatious interactions, though not alarming ones. Yellow Douglas, the guitarist, said she'd been friendly but cautious. However, later that night, some passengers recalled seeing Amy in an elevator with a man who was not a family member. No footage confirms it, but the timing fits between her return to the cabin and her father's final sighting of her asleep on the balcony. Cruise ships are often marketed as sanctuaries, isolated paradises where danger can't follow, but they're also floating microcosms of anonymity. Thousands of passengers from dozens of countries, staff that rotates every few weeks, weak security oversight, no central database of incidents. And when a ship docks in a foreign port, jurisdiction becomes a tangle of flags and treaties. If a crime happens offshore, it's rarely prosecuted onshore. That legal vacuum creates an opportunity, one that organized traffickers have exploited for decades. In Amy's case, the alleged sightings align eerily with known trafficking routes through Curaçao and Barbados in the late 1990s. The Canadian diver's account of a woman being controlled by two men on a beach matches patterns of coercion described in trafficking cases. The Navy officer's testimony about the brothel encounter, a woman whispering, "I'm Amy Bradley," is almost textbook for trafficking victims attempting escape under watch. Even the 2005 photograph of Jazz, the woman resembling Amy on a sex site, fits this grim narrative. Analysts confirmed the tattoo locations matched hers. The woman's expression in the image, distant, strained, became an enduring nightmare for the family. If true, it means Amy may have lived for years after her disappearance, trapped in a world beyond reach. Critics of the trafficking theory argue that no verified evidence supports it. No confirmed sighting, no documentation, no DNA. And yet, absence of proof isn't proof of absence. Human trafficking cases often leave no trace precisely because victims are stripped of identity, moved between islands, renamed, erased. Investigators who revisited the case of the Netflix docuseries noted another detail that lends weight to the abduction hypothesis: the ship's delayed response. Had security locked down the decks within that first hour? Had they treated it as an emergency rather than a misunderstanding? Whoever might have taken Amy could have been trapped on board. Instead, by 8 a.m., hundreds had disembarked into the maze of Curaçao's ports. If Amy was escorted off the ship then, she vanished not into the sea, but into the crowd. Forensic psychologists later analyzed the case, calling it a crime of opportunity, one that could have been prevented by swift action. Their conclusion echoed what the family had been saying for decades. Amy didn't vanish into the ocean. She vanished through the cracks of a system designed to protect corporations, not people. Today, each theory lives on in a parallel timeline of what might have been. The fall theory comforts those who crave closure. The escape theory tempts those who believe in reinvention. The abduction theory keeps alive the idea that Amy may still exist somewhere, waiting to be found. But all three share one thing in common: none can be proven. And that's what gives the story its power and its pain. In interviews for the Netflix series, Amy's brother Brad summed it up best. We live in two worlds. In one, Amy's gone. In the other, she's out there somewhere, waiting. And we never know which one's real until we open our eyes each morning. The sea never forgets. It only waits. For the Bradley family, every year since 1998 has been measured not in time, but in silence. In unanswered calls, unopened doors, and waves that keep returning without bringing anything back, the world moved on. The Rhapsody of the Seas changed itineraries, its decks repainted, its cabins refitted for new passengers seeking paradise. But for Ron and Iva Bradley, that ship will always be something else. The last place their daughter was ever seen alive. In interviews, Iva's voice carries the weight of years spent waiting for the phone to ring. "You learn how to live two lives," she once said. One where she's gone, and one where she's still out there. The hardest part is not knowing which one is real. That uncertainty, the invisible border between hope and grief, became their world. Every few years, a tip reignited that world like a flare in the night. A photograph from a Caribbean website, a reported sighting in South America, a letter claiming someone had met Amy from a cruise. Each time, Ron and Iva would brace themselves, because every lead brought both possibilities, salvation or heartbreak, and yet they always followed, always called, always hoped. What made Amy's case endure wasn't just a mystery. It was a symbolism. She was young, successful, loved. She didn't fit the stereotypes of risk or recklessness that people often use to explain disappearances. She was in every way the kind of person who should have been safe. That contradiction forced people to confront a terrifying truth. If someone like Amy could vanish in plain sight, then anyone could. Cruise ships, once symbols of luxury and safety, began to look different in the public imagination. Behind the glamour and open bars lay something else, a jurisdictional abyss, where laws blurred and accountability dissolved the moment the shoreline disappeared. Amy's case became a rallying cry for reform. By 2010, the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act was signed into law, largely due to the relentless pressure of families like the Bradleys. The law required ships to carry rape kits, maintain better surveillance, and report missing persons promptly to the FBI. But legislation can't bring back what the ocean has taken. It can only make the next tragedy slightly harder to repeat. And even with the new law, Amy's case remains open, not cold, not closed, but suspended, somewhere between investigation and memorial. In the decade since, her story has evolved from headline to legend. It appears on true crime podcasts, investigative specials, and Reddit threads dissected frame by frame. People who were children when she disappeared now debate her fate like a collective unsolved riddle, one that haunts anyone who's ever looked over the railing of a cruise ship and felt the weight of that endless water. Some call it the ghost story of the Caribbean. Others call it a failure of justice. To her family, it's simply life, stretched across 27 years of unanswered questions. The Netflix docuseries Amy Bradley is Missing reignited everything. For the first time in years, the case felt alive again, not as nostalgia, but as a living question. New witnesses stepped forward. Former crew members broke silence. Investigators reanalyzed old evidence with modern technology. The documentary didn't solve the case, but it gave Amy her voice back. Through home videos, diary excerpts, and family interviews, audiences saw her as more than a name. They saw her laugh, her drive, her stubborn independence, qualities that make her disappearance even harder to accept. The final episode closes with Ron Bradley's words, spoken to the camera through tears that years of grief haven't softened. "We were told to let her go. But how do you let go of your child when you don't even know where she is?" It's the same question millions of viewers ask when the credits roll, the one that lingers in the air long after the screen fades to black. Because Amy's story isn't just about one missing woman. It's about how quickly a life can vanish in a place built to make you feel untouchable. It's about the illusion of safety, and the families who learn too late that safety is never guaranteed. And it's about the water itself, vast, indifferent, eternal, holding secrets that the living will never stop trying to pull back from its depths. In 2025, Amy Lynn Bradley would have turned 51 years old. Somewhere, a file with her name still sits on an FBI desk, labeled missing, possible kidnapping. Even after more than 2 decades, the Bradley family continues to follow every lead that surfaces, no matter how small. Over the years, they've received occasional calls and tips from people who believe they saw Amy, though none have ever been confirmed. Each March, the anniversary of her disappearance passes quietly, marked by remembrance and the same hope that has kept the family searching since 1998, that somewhere, somehow, the truth about Amy Lynn Bradley will finally be found.